Okay, Chair, you're now live. Chair, you're now live.
Can I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. Well, welcome everybody. I'd like to welcome all councillors, officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. My name's Councillor Paul Myers and I'm Chairman of the panel. I'll now call out the names of the other members of the panel and ask them to confirm that they are present. So could you each do that in turn, starting with Councillor Dogood, please?
Present.
Excellent. And then Councillor Elliott.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Hodge.
Present.
Councillor McPhee.
Present.
Councillor Furs. Not yet. Councillor Singleton.
Present.
And Councillor Warrington.
Present.
Thank you, everybody. Michaela, if you can note Councillor Furs' absence, but maybe he will be joining us. Okay. Also present are a number of officers who will be introduced as we make our way through the agenda. But at this point, I would like to thank Officer Mark Durnford of Democratic Services, who's moved on to other panels and meetings. And I'd like to welcome Michaela here today, who will be taking the minutes and overseeing the meeting. So welcome to Michaela. Can I remind members and officers to keep background noise to a minimum, to only speak one person at a time and not to speak over others. If you could please mute your microphones when you're not speaking and then unmute when I ask you to speak. If you could please indicate if you wish to speak by using the chat facility on Zoom by typing MIS, may I speak, and I'll call you to speak in turn. But informally as chair, I have this prerogative. If I am missing you, then please wave and I will check the MIS and what's gone wrong, so that it just makes sure that nobody gets missed. If a member of the panel has to leave the meeting, then please can you draw my attention to this by using the chat facility. And if you subsequently return to the meeting, then please also draw my attention to this in the same way. Members should also inform me if they lose connection and miss any part of the meeting, as this may result in them not being able to vote on any item they did not hear in full. Should the panel need to take a vote, I'll read out each member's name in alphabetical order. Each member should then clearly state for, against, or abstain. This will enable the Democratic Services Officer to accurately record the vote and will also ensure that decision taking is clear to the public who are viewing us on YouTube. So does anybody have any questions at this stage? No? Okay, well, thank you. We now move to item 2 on our agenda, which is apologies for absence and substitutions. And Michaela, could you give any details of apologies for absence and substitutions, please?
I've had no apologies, but as I mentioned earlier, Andy Furs said he was going to miss the pre-meeting, but was attending to attend the actual meeting, so he's probably just running late. So no other apologies.
Jolly good. If I could then move on to item 3, which is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No, no. As is standard, if you do think of anything during the meeting, then please just draw my attention to it and we'll tackle it, make a note as and when. Item 4, there's no urgent business agreed by the chair. So we're on to item 5, which is public councillor statements. And I'd like to invite David Redgewell to make a statement on transport matters, please, for 3 minutes. Are you there, David? David, and are you ready to go?
Yep, thank you very much, Chairman.
Okay.
I'd just like to draw the panel's attention to further work that's gone on the bus network. We've got quite a few more buses now back, which is good news on a lot of the routes, although I'm still concerned there's still only 4 buses a day between Bristol and Bath via Kelston and Weston, apart from the school buses. So that's something we still need to keep working on. And the links between Bath and Wales don't run so late now through Radstock and Midsummer Norton. It's about 7:30 rather than about 9:30, but there still is buses to Poulton and late to Farrington Gurney. So, and Farnborough. So we're making progress there. Would like WECA to look at with Baines and Bristol at South Bristol routes, in particular, Keynsham across to Whitchurch and to the hospital. There's a lot of little routes that got provided by HCT, not by First. You may have read in the newspaper, it's First, it's not First, it's HCT, Hat Community Transport run them. And they run up to the border at Baines and they run up to the border at Bristol. And if we were to get some working together with some through routes, we'd probably get a better network. Just done that in South Gloucestershire with Bristol. Find a very good network out of Southby, Bristol Park and Severn Beach, which has made a much better network in that area. So I think there's some work there. On COVID security, there's still issues to make sure the bus and rail stations kept clean. I think that's a big issue for Baines to corporately deal with. It's in different ownerships, that bus and rail station in Bath, but it's very, very important. And I make that point again today, Jim, and everybody, that has to be because the trains that run in there now, some of the public transport comes from South Wales. And as we know, South Wales is locked down with quite high COVID rates, and we don't want it spreading into Baines and Bristol and South Gloucestershire, and there's a risk. So the other one I'd really like to raise with yourself, Chair, as well, is tourism. Now that Bristol and Bath tourism is merged, there's a danger, of course, that North East Somerset's lost from that conglomerate, and there's a danger probably South Gloucestershire is. But there isn't a tourist information centre in Bath, and I'm just wondering whether there's a conversation to be had between the bus station, first the bus station owners, the property company, and Bristol Bath Tourism Plus, to see if we can get a tourist information point returned in the city, and obviously also a bus information point returned in the city. And I think a bit of work could help do that. So I think there's some work there to go forward with, and I would hope that Destination Bristol and Bath would work on that proposal, because I do think we need a view for the city, for people visiting to know where to go and visit, where to stay, hotels, and into North East Somerset as well. Of course, the same could happen in the Wells travel shop as well, in Wells bus station. So really is picking up those issues and making sure that the government hear the voice very clearly for investment in ongoing railways and buses in our area. Because as James Freeman told me on Saturday, it's costing us £27 million a week in England to maintain buses. And of course, the railways at 180 million a week to maintain the rail network. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, I don't believe we have any further speakers. So on that basis, we'll move forward to the next agenda item, which is the Cabinet Member update. And could I invite Cabinet Member Councillor Richard Samuel to speak to the meeting, please?
We just need to do the minutes as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It was at the top of my screen. So apologies. Item 6 are minutes of the previous meeting. These have all been circulated. Are there any questions or corrections to those minutes? If not, could I have a proposer and a seconder that we accept them, please? So I can't see who that is. Karen, yeah? You're willing to propose, and Winston second. So I'll go round as it's in the form. So if you could vote with your vote. So Winston?
Yes.
In favour. Karen?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Howell McPhee?
Yes.
Councillor Sean Hughes?
Yes.
Councillor Mark Elliott?
Yeah, in favour.
Councillor Lucy?
Yes, fine, thank you.
Councillor Andrew Furs?
Yes, Chair, but I wasn't here, so I feel that I can't, you know, I can't not support it, but that's what it was. Yeah, just so you know, I wasn't here.
At the meeting, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, at the meeting, yes.
I don't think that matters. So there we go. And I think that's all the councillors. Oh no, there's Councillor Alistair Singleton.
Yes.
Yeah, you're in favour. So that's
Yep.
unanimous, Michaela, in favour of accepting the minutes. So thank you, everybody, for that. And now it's over to Councillor Richard Samuel on the Cabinet Member update.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you, and good afternoon, Cabinet Corporate Policy members. I want to do this in two parts. First of all, there are some matters just to update you on, and then Andy Rothery and myself want to give you a short update on where we have got to on the medium-term financial strategy that will be going to Cabinet on the 8th of October. So we'll do it in two parts like that, if that's okay. And I'll leave it to you, Chairman, to decide when questions come. So first of all, a few things, routine things to report and confirm. The Q2, which is about to end, will be the report on the outturn of Q2 will be reported to the Cabinet in November. But I just wanted to say in connection with that, that it will try to update the Cabinet as much as it possibly can on the funding position vis-a-vis local government funding from the central government at that point. And there will be revised estimates put into the Q2 report, which will give us a stronger indication of where we're going to end up year end. What I can say so far is we do expect the position to have improved considerably over the Q1 forecasting, which members will know at that point, funding announcements from the government were fairly thin on the ground. But the big thing that will have changed then is a claim will have gone in for the income compensation scheme that the government announced in July, and which we're now in the process of completing that claim. So that will make quite a big impact on the council's finances in a positive way. So that's just to flag up that Q2 report that will go to Cabinet in November. On commercial estate, property estate, as we all know, this panel has looked at that on a number of occasions as part of call-ins. And what I can confirm to you is that the council is about to employ external advisors to look at the way the commercial estate operates, whether it achieves the best returns, whether the way we organize the handling of the work in relation to the commercial estate, whether that is effective, whether it could be done better. And we're about to, as I say, we're about to appoint an external advisor to assist us with that piece of work. At the same time, in the next couple of weeks, we expect the Chief Executive to have brought forward some proposals for senior management organisational change across the council. And it is my expectation that the property service will there will be changes to property services as a result of those bigger plans. That doesn't mean impacts on the staff within property services, but probably the management reporting and how that is led. But I won't say any more about that yet because he hasn't published those figures, but just to flag that up. Earlier this year, there was a call-in in relation to the cricket club site, and this panel made certain recommendations on that. This is just to say, if members haven't picked this up, but I have signed off now the responses in relation to those panel recommendations. There are a couple within that cannot be signed off until the work commences because they were downstream benefits from the development. but that will be, they will come back to me closer to the time. Just a little bit about, and we'll come on to this in relation to the medium-term financial strategy. The Chancellor's announcement last week in relation to support for businesses, I think was quite disappointing for North and North East Somerset, because there were no indications, for example, that the business rate holiday that businesses have enjoyed will be continuing in the next financial year. And that's certainly going to be quite a struggle for businesses. Also, it doesn't appear that there is any more specific support for hospitality businesses. And of course, these are going to be hit in some shape or form by the 10 o'clock curfew arrangement. So we will come back to this, and we will try and include some updating on the way the lockdowns are affecting businesses and our own estate, but it's just to kind of highlight that. And when we come on to the medium-term financial position, I mean, I will probably expand on my concerns that our own tenants who are operating hospitality businesses, I think, are going to be under particular financial stress in the coming months. So that may be something that we will return to. I think those are the main issues that I wanted to highlight as current. The main piece of work that we have been working on for the last couple of months is the revision to the medium-term financial strategy, which is about to be published for next week's cabinet. So Andy Rothery and I want to run through that. Andy has got some slides, not too many, I can assure you, to just help brief you better as a panel. So
could I just interject, Richard? Would it be best if anybody had any burning questions just on some of the specifics you've mentioned, to get
Yes,
those out of the way now and then focus afterwards on the medium term? So
yes,
does anybody have any questions not relating to the medium term financial plan on anything Richard said?
I have, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was to expand a little bit more on what you said, Richard, about the Baines tenants, the businesses that are under stress at the moment. I know around the city centre that I get my ear bent regularly regarding, what is Baines doing as a landlord, where other landlords I hear, I don't know how true it is, that are giving some sort of rent relief or rent holiday or rent reduction or whatever it might be. And I don't know whether you have, or Andy Rothery or anyone has sort of tested the private market to understand what they are doing, so that we can align ourselves and take some pressure off some of these businesses, as you are very aware, are under significant pressure.
Well, a couple of things to say on that. First of all, we have invited all of our tenants who wish to open a dialogue with us if they are having real difficulty meeting their rental payments, and whether we can restructure those with their agreement to assist them through this particular difficult period. And quite a lot of businesses have taken advantage of that and have had discussions with us and have concluded agreements. Our policy position is that we are not giving people rent free. And there's a very good reason for that. There's a number of very good reasons for that. The first is that the council's commercial estate already expects to see a substantial reduction in its income this year. And I think I've made the point in other places that every pound that we do not take in commercial rent income is a pound off the money that we have to provide our services. So we have taken that line, but we're also trying to open a dialogue with big landlords in the city. And in fact, tomorrow I'm chairing a meeting with 4 of the principal landlords in the city to see what we can do working together to help reinvigorate the estate in the city. And initially that will, these landlords are concerned with properties around Milsom Street because it won't have escaped anybody's notice that there are a lot of vacant units in Milsom Street, not all owned by us. But what is said to me is that if you see a decline in a sector of the city like that, it will knock on into other parts of the city. And we've got to work with other landlords who are all facing the same problems to see if there are things that collectively we can do together to encourage new tenants where units are empty, and to help tenants where we have existing tenancies. The signs coming across from the market locally are that there is a substantial correction in rent levels about to take place over the next couple of years. And it's certainly from the property staff tell me that the sorts of agreements that can be negotiated with new prospective tenants or tenants wishing to renew are that they will not take rents at the previous levels by any shape or form. Obviously, it will be different for every premises, but there is a substantial market correction going on. So I think that's all I can say, really. We are trying to, we've had a number of requests from groups of businesses. Vera Hobhouse held a meeting a couple of weeks ago with traders from Broad Street. I think the leader is planning a follow-up meeting with those traders. Councillor Tom Davis and myself are in regular contact with Walcott Street traders because they're both in our ward. And so we're trying to keep a dialogue going with businesses in the city to understand the extent of their problems and what the council can practically do to assist businesses. But I think to finish this point, the government schemes now have effectively ended. There is no big intervention left or proposed as far as I'm aware. And I think that is quite difficult for businesses to accept because it does mean that the safety net has been effectively removed now. So I think we're all kind of watching this very anxiously. And we will do what we can to support businesses, but I think I have to say the support we can now offer is fairly limited.
Very, very informative. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any other questions? Sean.
Sorry, just very quickly on that same point. Could you also include the businesses outside of Bath in that dialogue to do with issues with rent, etc.?
Absolutely. The interventions are not solely applicable to Bath. They apply across the whole council area where we have estate and where we have tenants. So certainly not making any exclusion for businesses in North East Somerset, and the approach is across the whole of our area.
Okay, are there any other questions? I had a question. Previously, we heard that a senior officer was carrying out, I think I'd understood, a review of property services. So how does this consultant's report fit in with that? Has the other report concluded, or is this taking over, or is it running alongside? And I don't know if you're able to say, is there any indication of the scale of this project and how much it's going to cost?
Well, I can answer part of that. So to take it in parts. So the senior officer looking at this was Mandy Bishop, who was asked by the chief executive to look at the way the property services staffing was organised, and I think in particular the separation of maintenance and management from day-to-day property decisions. The external reviewer that I'm talking about will be designed to look at what is best commercial practice. And I think that is best done by an external eye. It will help us deal with the occasional criticisms that there have been, that the council doesn't get the best out of its property, and so they will be looking at the property service from that perspective rather than the staffing. The two, of course, will come together, and you will see when we come to it in a moment and subsequently in the budget that looking at the effective management of what is a very large property portfolio is crucial to the council's long-term financial stability. And there's no doubt in my mind that there is scope to improve the way we have done things in the past. And that's, that's not any criticism of anybody who's in the service, but I think that this is a very complicated service and there are many, many different competing demands on that service.
Okay.
So I think the two pieces of work will come together, Chairman.
Well, thank you for that. If there are no questions, I'm becoming very conscious of time because I'd allowed so much time for the cabinet update, and now we've got a medium-term plan section. Can you give any indication as to how much time you were envisaging for this? It's not a full-scale presentation, is it?
No. We have tried to pare this down to the bare bones of the things that need to be said. And we will go through it as quickly as we can. And obviously how long the item takes depends how many subsequent questions come from the panel. So
well, if you can confine yourself no longer than 5 minutes then to start with, then we can then have our time for questions and crack on. So over to whoever's going to take the lead on it then.
Okay, Andy, if you're there somewhere in cyberspace, can you put up the slides? Right, are we in slide view or is that just... Okay, so just move on. Thank you. And the next one. Okay, so we start with the position. Thank you, Andy. We start with the position statement. And you can see that just take us straight to the bottom line really there, the funding gap. But also I think it's quite instructive to look at the graph. And the graph shows that the big gap in finances that COVID has created does create a funding shortfall in 21-2. And this is, the way I view this is a bit like a bow wave, that there is a very serious impact at the beginning and it ripples through subsequent years, probably for 5 years, when you see that as we move towards the end of that period, the gap closes. But at the moment, the starting position is that without any mitigations, the funding gap in 21-2 is 18 million and it reduces thereafter. Can you go to the next one, Andy? So I think there's just a few things to say about this and then Andy will come in really, is we are working on the assumption that government assistance will not continue after this financial year. And I've already referred to the business rates relief. There are a whole pile of decisions that we are waiting for from the government in terms of funding settlements, the restrictions around council tax levels, and all of this is going to have a big impact on the strategy when we get there. But we are assuming that assistance to the social care sector will continue, obviously because of the importance in tackling COVID. I think it's you next, Andy.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, so this slide gives a bit of context to the first slide that shows the funding gap, because as Richard said on the previous slide, we're not assuming that any of the government grants are going to continue, but we do have significant income loss that will continue. So on top of that, this slide shows a few of the core budget planning assumptions. So as an example, we're factoring in pay inflation throughout the term, demographic growth annually, and also contract inflation. So these are things that occur every year for our financial planning and build up some of our cost pressures. As you can see lower down, at the moment, the base case assumption is 2% increase on council tax, because this year we had a 2% on council tax and additional 2% on council tax for the adult social care precept, but that was only announced for 1 year. So we haven't had any confirmation that will continue. So that does impact on our profile because we've only included council tax increase of 2% per annum, which generates around 2 million, which isn't enough to fund all of those demand pressures. So the next slide shows the more significant budget rebasing that we're having to do around commercial estate, parking and heritage, which putting these three together equate to around 15 million, which is why that first year looks so challenging from the first slide where we had the significant gap between funding and budget. So I'm going to hand back to Richard around how we're approaching some of our planning around the MTFS.
Yeah, go to the next. Yeah. So this is divided neatly into three parts, really. Obviously, at the moment, we are trying to stabilize our finances, and we've agreed the financial recovery plan. I think we will be reporting on how we're doing with that in the Q2 figures that I referred to earlier on. We then look really starting to look at the future, and you can see from the graph that the council actually needs to radically change its delivery model over the next 5 years. We will have to look at the council's operating structure, and as I said, the chief executive has been doing that and will be bringing forward plans. And we will have to look at the way we work and the expectations about how we provide services and where staff work from. And those are obviously massive pieces of work that can't be done, quickly. And then going on to the longer term, those things that I mentioned earlier, particularly around commercial income, that is going to have to be examined. But also a very large piece of work is going to be needed to conclude on adult social care delivery to see whether we can do this in a more effective and ultimately cheaper way than it is at the moment. And as part of that, whether we can wrap some of our services more around the resident than perhaps the more silo form of delivery that we have been used to in the past. So there are some quite big changes here. It's very difficult to convey the depth of those changes in a line in a presentation like this. But we are expecting to have to change things pretty fundamentally over the next 4 to 5 years. Okay, and then I think the next one, okay. So you're doing this one, I think, Andy, aren't you?
Yeah, I'll take this one. Thanks, Richard. So on here, there's 4 key assumptions that we're building in for how to manage the financial strategy going forwards. The first is the acknowledgement that there will be a temporary funding requirement to enable the council to smooth out the delivery of savings over the next 2 years, because taking 30 million of savings out of our budget in pure recurrent savings in 2 years is a task that I think is significantly challenging, and we need to recognise that it will take more time to do that in a structured way. So assumption 1 is temporary funding. Assumption 2, and this is subject to MHCLG and government settlement announcements, but it's maintaining council tax at the same level as 2021 in future years to generate more income that will help fund some of that demand growth that is on the first slides. Also, the need to really look quite deeply at adult social care and make sure we're doing very thorough, robust demand planning to align our adult social care budgets to current service provision needs. And also, as Richard said, looking at the commercial estate portfolio in detail to look at the ways we can look at alternative diversified income, because current income levels under its utilisation are at risk. With those 4 assumptions, this graph shows how they've been played into the numbers. So what you can see, and I think the best thing to do is look at the graph at the bottom, which is a smoother profile over 21, 22 and 22, 23, which is largely through a balance of council tax being held at 3.99% and also utilisation of temporary funding, which gives a much, well, whilst it's still very challenging because there are significant savings in those first 2 years, it becomes something that is more manageable. And also it does smooth out the profile a little bit on later years where there are savings to be made, but they do start dropping down a little bit into a much more even profile. So that's, I think, it from me on the numbers. I'm going to just end the presentation there because that was the last slide, and hand back to Richard just to close off.
So not quite 5 minutes, but we've done our best to kind of compress that. So Chairman, over to you, and then we'll try and take questions between us.
We thank you for that, Richard and Andy. It's quite a large piece of work which I hadn't actually expected, and I think if we do this again, I'd really welcome some notice that we could actually put it on the agenda or allow time. But recognising how important this is, we do have to cover the rest of the agenda, so I'll try and cut time from there. But if we could take questions and if we could try and keep the responses fairly tight, I'd be very grateful, so we can try and get back on track time-wise. So are there questions? Hal?
I was wondering, I see that you're going to try and increase the returns on your property. Would it be fair to say that the key element there will be to convert commercial property towards residential?
Well, that will be an option, but it won't be the only option. There are a number of different components to this. There will be some property where the return in residential letting is higher than can be achieved through commercial letting. But of course, our stock is predominantly in Bath, and there are other constraints about doing some of that. So that's partly true. There is quite a lot of our property that is either underutilized or not utilized. In other words, uses have not been found for properties. So there will be questions there about how much of that stock we've got sitting there earning nothing and costing money. So there'll be a range of questions like this that come up as we go through. Obviously, the aim here is to produce the highest net return on the capital assets that we have. That's the approach we'll be looking to use. And I think there'll be a number of different approaches needed for different property types.
If I could encourage a fairly concise answer, I'd be very grateful. I know it's a key topic, but to allow other members to ask questions. Was that okay, Richard? Have you finished? Yeah.
So I have, yeah.
If you need to say more, do, but try and be concise, because if each one takes 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, I thought he was fairly concise there, but I was going to go back, but I'll leave my questioning.
Are there any other questions? Nobody is. It wasn't meant to stop anybody. Hal, if you want to ask your question, you can do now.
Well, the reason that I asked that question about residential was, as you know, with on the planning area, it's very important to us to know how many residences or whatever are coming on stream, it seems to me, so that if that is going to be a significant component, it'd be interesting for us to know roughly what it might amount to.
It's not possible to answer that question in the simplistic way. I mean, if you took some of our city centre stock in Bath, it will be allocated in planning terms as prime retail shop frontage, and it won't be possible to simply convert the use into a house. What may be possible, and is probably likely, is that many of those premises have vacant space above the shops, which is capable of conversion into residential units. So I think that's likely to be a component. But on the other side, there is certainly property that the council owns, which is not allocated to residential use at the moment, but which probably could be. So I think you'll see a mix of different approaches.
Right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Last call for questions.
I think I saw Councillor Hodge.
Lucy. I can manage. I did see that. Thank you. Lucy.
Sorry, it's just one point, and I didn't want to get into a long discussion on it, but I just thought I have to flag it up here that in the medium-term financial plan, we seem to be embarking on really profound changes in the way all of us work, councillors and officers. And I would just like some assurance that that it seems to be reflecting a vision of the chief exec, I suppose, and that there will be a process of consultation, really, on a step-by-step consultation and informing us of some of these changes as they happen, rather than, I mean, recently the Lewis House changes came to our attention in the media statement, and it was quite a surprise to some of us. So I envisage enormous changes, and I hope there's going to be we're going to be kept abreast of them as they happen.
Well, I think what I'd say, that's a completely fair point. What I'd say is that about 6 weeks ago, I guess, maybe slightly more, all staff were surveyed on to try and get a sense of their experience during lockdown and what it meant for their working practice, the places they work from, if they're working from home, the issues that created. The majority of staff, I think, have embraced this and made it work for them. But there is a significant number of staff who have found it difficult to work from home for various reasons. They either didn't have the space or poor connectivity or a whole range of reasons like that. So, I mean, I will give you the assurance that you're seeking. I think that as we move to a very different way of working, of course, we will have to carry the staff with us. So you do have that assurance that we will try and do that as much as we can.
Could I also just follow off the back of that? I presume as well you mean to consult with residents where it impacts on them in line with the consultation charter as well. I mean, I know Lucy referred to staff, but it would also be residents as well, as it affects things that are provided for them.
Yeah, yes, I can confirm we will do that. Where services need to change because of the way that the council is able to run its services, if that has an impact on residents, then of course we will consult on that. So yes, you have that assurance as well.
Okay, are there any more questions? I've not got any MISs on the chat. So otherwise then, thank you very much, Councillor Samuel and Andy Rothery, for your presentation. And Michaela, that will be circulated, will it, along with the minutes or to panel members, the presentation?
Yeah, I've already asked Andy to send it to me, so I'll send it on with you and put it in the minutes.
Excellent. Okay then, so our next agenda item is the Community Contribution Fund. And if I could please invite Gary Adams and Carl Thomas Roberts to introduce the report and show the presentation. And then I'll invite members on the panel to ask questions to start with. And then if we draw a line on the sort of factual questions, we'll then go into our debate and work towards looking at what council asked us to do on this. And am I right in understanding, Michaela, that now a copy of the original council resolution has been circulated to panel members? Yeah. Excellent.
Yes.
Okay then, so if I could hand over to our officers for the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share screen to get the presentation up. 1 second. Can everybody see that? Yeah. Okay, so this agenda item is in response to the Labour Group motion at July Council, where it was agreed in principle to introduce a community contribution fund from next year, and asking the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel to consider and report back up with recommendations on how this may work in practice. So to facilitate this, we've put together this slide show with some background information on how this scheme is operating in other councils, mainly Westminster and Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. And after that background information, we'll go into the discussion questions covering points A to D here, showing on the screen from the council motion. So that's covering the scope of the scheme, the management of the scheme, utilisation of any fund, and also engagement needed. So I'll pass over now to Carl, who's done a kind of high-level desktop analysis of how the scheme works in Westminster. So I'll click on and pass over to Carl.
Thanks, Gary. So when Westminster set this up, they went to the wealthy property owners who had requested some sort of scheme to help fund some of the council services. All council taxpayers do receive a letter, and the Westminster model also allows non-residents to contribute. It's managed by an existing charitable trust that was established many years ago. It's generated £1 million since its inception. This is the third year of the scheme running. The administration is done through a web portal, so online donations through there, and local community groups apply for the grant funds. So depending on the projects there, if they're aligned with the aims of the council, they can make a bid for those funding from that. So their current projects are listed there, so rough sleepers, helping young people reach potential, and assisting lonely people. Next slide, Gary, please. So the following slide gives some details, some metrics on the different sort of council tax bands. So it gives some idea between the three councils. Next slide, please. So this actually shows that the two London boroughs have a much higher proportion of dwellings in band G and H. It's no surprise really that given that the average house price for a detached property in Westminster is 5 million, and in Bath, North East Somerset is 450,000. You can see that we've worked, much lower bands is the distribution for Bath and North East Somerset, as opposed to the two London boroughs. This would indicate that there's a possible lower contribution, but it depends on who actually gets approached for it and wants to contribute. Kensington and Chelsea consultation only went with their band H customers, council taxpayers, and they've got over 15,000 of those. But that resulted in about 1,100, just over 1,100 replies, and 700 of those, indicated they would contribute to a fund. Next slide, please. Here's a different way of looking at the graph. So as you can see, that band H properties for Bath and North East Somerset, we've got 436 as opposed to over 15,000 in each of the two London boroughs. And that distribution is mirrored down through, where we've got many more bands A, B and C compared to the others. Next slide, please. And just to give some indication of also affordability on how much we charge in council tax compared with Westminster, our band H is £3,500 per annum, whereas Westminster charge 1,348. And that includes, for Bath and North East Somerset, includes the precepting authorities, and the Westminster charge around 50% of that goes to the London councils as well. So that just gives an indication of the actual bills that go out to the two areas. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll hand back to Gary for the take the questions forward.
Thanks, Carl. So it's probably worth pausing there in case there's any questions on the background information before we get into the discussion points. So I'll hand back to you, Chair, temporarily.
Okay, so Are you suggesting then that what we'll do is debate each of these questions with your slide?
Yeah, if that's how you want to do it, unless you want to
That's
go
going to be
through-
quite tricky unless you can minimize the slide, because I can't see either the chat or anybody's face.
Right. Is it worth me just running through this and then
Yes,
on the shared screen, and then we'll bring up for the next one,
Yeah,
next
but-
point further?
bring up. I was making a note of the 5 areas. If we could ask the panel, are you? Is there anybody have a problem with us doing that? If we get to the end of the presentation and then look at the 5 question areas that council asked us to look at. Again, unless it's how I'm using it, I can still only see one person, Gary, on the screen. Okay, I can't hear anybody and I can't see anybody. Oh, hang on, I've got chat back. Yeah, so Councillor Warrington and Councillor Hodge, are you asking to speak on the question I just raised, or generally?
Generally for me, please, Chair.
Okay. Excellent.
Generally as well, yeah.
Okay, well, on that basis, Gary, could you go through the whole presentation and then I think we'll come back and tackle each point, yeah?
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the first discussion point is on the scope of the scheme, and this is in relation to the council question whether the council should adopt an inclusive approach, inviting all council taxpayers to contribute, or whether it should be just limited to those in Band H. And we've set out a few considerations the panel may want to discuss. So whether it assumes there's wealth in those larger properties if you only target Band H residents, or whether it'd be fairer to present this across all bands. And also, you know, would you consider visitors, businesses and other organisations making contributions? So that's the first question. The second one is about management of the scheme. So considering what the vehicle may be for the council running the scheme. So it could be through an independent body such as a charitable trust, which is what Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea have done, or it could be run internally by the council. So some views there. But we'd need to consider the complexity and cost of setup and administering that against the potential for generating income through donations in our area. Also be mindful of timescales and consider the governance arrangements of the scheme and who will decide the use of the funds and any grants given from the fund. The third element is on utilisation. So what is the mechanism for identifying the local priorities to support? So should they be linked to council priorities and corporate strategy, or are there any other areas that are more suited to a voluntary contribution-based funding approach? And also considering any engagement with residents to inform those specific priorities. And then point 4 was on engagement, and that was answering the question of what will be the means of consulting with residents on the introduction of any fund. So, you know, do we need an initial consultation to gauge support of the fund or the principle of introducing a fund? That could include what priorities for the use of the funds, and then also thinking about the best way of consulting with the various groups. So they're the 4 kind of key areas. If I stop the presentation now and
I've actually managed to get everybody's screen up on the side of the presentation. So if you could take us back to the first point, yeah.
Yeah.
Do people have any questions in general, or would panel members, are you happy that we just go through each of these slides and and focus on the questions at this stage. Could I just take a show of hands on that?
On what?
On whether we just go through each of the points
I
on
don't
the
know.
slides.
I want to ask a question, Chair.
Okay, well, let's take the 2 questions. Karen, if you go first,
Um,
and I'll take you.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you had any sense of the other rates of council tax in the London boroughs, so Kensington and Chelsea. Are they a similar level to Westminster?
Yeah, I can answer that. Kensington and Chelsea are around about double Westminster. I think Westminster are one of the lowest council tax in London,
Right.
but I think they're around half the difference between Westminster and the Bath and North East Somerset charge.
Thank you.
Okay, and Lucy, would you like to speak?
Yeah, so it's just a question relating to the slides we've been shown rather than general discussion, which I think is happening afterwards. So I wanted to go back to the graph, and you added in that you had in there that extra graph that I asked for with the 3 columns.
Yeah.
I think that one, that's it, that's great. So what I wanted to be really clear about is Westminster Council raised, and correct me if I'm wrong, raised £1 million, but their consultation, they offered that opportunity to contribute to all their residents, and their number of dwellings is about 50% more than Baines. I'd like to know what total sum of money Kensington and Chelsea is more comparable, although obviously their distribution of properties is not. How much money did they arisen from their number of dwellings, which is more comparable to ours, even though the mix of wealth is different. So it's 1 million from Westminster Council. That went to everyone. I think Kensington and Chelsea only went to the high band. People contributed, and how much money did they raise from that? Because they're more comparable to us in number of dwellings. So it's how much did Kensington and Chelsea raise for their fund?
Yeah, unfortunately, Kensington and Chelsea have only just set theirs up, so I think it's gone live this year. So we don't have any information on the amount they've generated. So they were consulting last year to implement it this year. So
we're comparing with 2 councils, one which is much bigger and one more wealthy, one which is the same size and more wealthy. And are there any other councils that, are we only comparing with these because these are the only 2 that have gone down this route, or are there comparable councils to ours that have set up this sort of fund in terms of demographic?
Yeah, no, at the moment, Westminster were the first, and that was kind of 2.5 years ago. I think Kensington and Chelsea followed on from that. From our research, I'm not aware of anyone else of a similar size to us or outside of London that's done it previously. I know there's others looking at it kind of this year.
Thank you, that was my question, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I've got Alistair, who's on a phone, I believe, and then Sean, and then Hal to speak. So Alistair.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for being on a phone. Just a general comment on this, that I see no particular logic in a scheme which is limited to Band H properties, because many of us who don't live in Band H properties may wish to contribute, whereas that some who do will live chilly and impoverished lives in Band H properties may have no money to give. So my suggestion is that if we're going to do it, it should be open to all, whatever property they live in, or indeed whether they are non-residents or businesses whatsoever. I would personally favour the council running it rather than setting up a separate charity. Although I acknowledge the point about gift aid, it seems to me that the purpose of a fund like this should be to increase the council's ability to deliver on its priorities and its tasks. This is a way to increase income at a time when income is under pressure to support services that may otherwise be cut. So I would run it as part of the general council tax process, and I would therefore see no need to consult in advance for doing it, but rather to inform, as it looks as though it may well have happened in Westminster, simply informing people that this is what is happening and inviting them to support if they would like to do so. I have a real concern that if it were to be a separately administered charity, that it would compete with a number of very similar benevolent funds in Bath. We are very lucky to be endowed in this area with charities like St. John's, like Genesis, DHI, and I think there's a concern that the market for those might be cannibalized if the council moved in on that space. Thank you.
Okay. I've got Sean. We were just taking questions at this point, but I know Alistair probably missed some of the start on that. So there's Sean next.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to understand. I mean, your presentation seems to avoid the word compulsory anywhere. So just to clarify, is the primary proposal of this to be a compulsory tax on band H, or are we purely looking at, you purely putting forward a voluntary option? And which I understand is the option from Westminster.
Yeah, there's no legal powers to make this compulsory under kind of council tax legislation or charging. So any scheme kind of like Westminster would need to be a voluntary contribution system.
Okay, Hal, have you got questions or are you ready for the debate? Is it?
I'm on a question.
Oh, good. Fire away.
I was interested that they used a pre-existing charitable trust. I just wondered, how did they go with trustees? Where did these trustees come from? Were they just general members of the public, or was it the case that there were already members of the council involved? Can you give me any guidance on that?
Yeah, I'm not clear on the Westminster one, but I know on the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, because they were setting up a new charitable trust, that was a mixture of, I think they were having eight trustees, 4 were independent of the council and 4 were council appointed. And I think that was a mixture of council officers and members for the council share, if that helps.
Yeah, that does. Thank you very much.
I've got Karen and then Mark. So Karen.
Is it all right if I start on the debate then, Chair?
On the specific question for the officer?
No, I asked my question earlier. Thank you. I'm ready for the debate when you are, Chair.
So Mark, did you have a specific question?
Yes, I do.
Fire away.
Thanks, Chair. The graphs you've given give council tax band distribution, which is obviously we're using as a proxy for wealth, which is what the council tax system does. Do we have information on income for the residents in those areas? Because it seems to me that is a relevant point. Living in a large house doesn't necessarily make you income rich. Is there any? Do you have any kind of ideas about income distribution in Westminster and/or Kensington and Chelsea as compared to Bath?
Not to hand, but I think just from the information on the schemes, I think there is a lot, especially in Kensington and Chelsea and Westminster, of kind of ultra rich people. I think that's why it was kind of nicknamed the mansion tax. But obviously that I haven't got disposable income of residents in each of those boroughs compared to Bath and North East Somerset. Councillor, it's something we could find out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if that's the end of the specific questions, thank you very much to Gary and Carl. If we then move on to, we can tackle this two ways. We've got some very detailed questions here. If we went through these, listening to Alistair, you raised points that would accord with all of these. And I think if we went down the 4 areas and settled what our view was on the 4, it might be easier. Shall we try that and take the first area and people debate that and then move on to the second? And if at the end we haven't covered anything, then we can have an extra session just adding on that element. Could I have a show of hands, just as this isn't a vote, it's an indication? Are you happy to do it that way, as we've got such specific slide guidance? Yeah. So yeah. And those who are not happy, are you not happy to do that, Lucy? Sorry, it wasn't meant to put you on the spot. It was just if you shared why, people might change their minds.
I'm not, yes, I wondered whether we should discuss whether we think it's generally a good idea, but I suppose that would come out in the first question.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what we could do is that's why I'm really glad you've mentioned that. If we started off with the first point that you've raised there, is what do people genuinely feel about this scheme in the light of what we've heard, but without necessarily going into a very lot of detail, just as to what they think in the light of what we've heard. So I did have Karen down first, so if I take Karen and then you, Lucy, and we start the debate on that question. So Karen.
I don't have an issue in principle. I believe in it in principle. Where I'm going to come, especially maybe a bit later, is I'm conflicted with the costs and returns. 1 million in Westminster, which is again a larger organisation in terms of the number of houses that they have, and the number of Band H. If we are going to go down this route, then I think it would be a fairer approach to ask all residents if they would like to voluntarily contribute, plus visitors, businesses and other organisations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so looking at the list, I believe I've got Andy, Mark and Hal. And as Lucy raised this point, just out of courtesy, Lucy, would you like to follow now before and give your feedback on the overall picture?
Okay, I'll go quickly because I know I was speaking before, but I believe I like the idea in principle, and I would like to see a way of empowering residents to be able to contribute to things that services they feel have been cut or things that they would like to make happen with their own resources. What I'm concerned about with this is that we embark on something that isn't based on the Westminster model, that isn't going to give us the returns we're anticipating with associated costs, which I suppose is what Karen was saying. And when you look at the Chelsea and Westminster data with Band H, they consulted Band H 15,000, only 8% actually replied, and of that 8%, only 2/3 of the 8% that had that intention, only 2/3 wanted to contribute. So I think maybe we perhaps need to focus on possibly a different way of doing this, maybe in line with what Alistair was suggesting, to achieve the same end in some way. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
Okay, Mark, would you like to speak now?
I think Andy was next, but
follow
it from me too.
So Andy, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. Right, yeah. So yeah, I agree in principle, but, and there's a big but here, isn't there? I think that I agree with Karen about the cost and return. Yeah, that is something that needs to be really thought through. I agree with the principle that it should be open to all businesses and whoever alike. I think Alistair may have mentioned that earlier, or Hal. But I feel the whole scheme hinges on what it's targeted towards. Yeah. Now, for example, if we ask residents of Bath, North East Somerset to add funds, not fund completely, but add funds to things like youth services or parks or libraries, 3 streams of council funding that are not statutory, yeah. So over time, it's very, very likely that they would be eroded. Then I think that you would probably get some decent contribution, yeah. So it may be worth thinking about how it's targeted to understand the return. So, for example, there may be residents in my ward, let's say those who live around Royal Victoria Park or live around other parks or play areas, that they might want to see that their money targeted towards those areas. Then it comes to the question about how do we ring fence and what do we ring fence it for? And I think those are the important things, because people, I think, will be willing to contribute, yeah, hence going back to Karen's issue about cost and route and cost and return. They'd be willing to contribute if they could see that money targeted to, I don't know, their local park or the youth service in their area or whatever that might be. So I think deviating from the Westminster model, I think we've got to be a bit more targeted and a bit more thoughtful, but I'll just put that out there for other people to think about. But in principle, yes, I think there's no harm in doing it in principle. I can't work out what the downside is for not doing it, other than the costs that Karen raises. Thanks.
Okay, now to Mark.
Thanks, Chair. I think I echo what everybody else has said so far about it, not objecting in principle. I have obviously no in principle objection, but I think that Alistair's points are very sound, and that whatever we do, it needs to be simple. And I think that a lot of the things that have potentially been proposed in the slides add complexity and would extend time and therefore cost in the setup and administration. So I think whatever scheme is arrived at needs to be simple to explain and simple to administer. I do have some concerns about the idea of providing essentially through charity what should be provided through taxation and through government provision, local government provision. I realise that we're not talking about the legally statutory binding things, but I have concerns about moving to voluntary funding for things that we really should be providing anyway. And I think that we do need to take care of that, to be wary of that. And I also am listening to Andy talking about, people funding youth services or parks around that. What the other thing I would very much want to avoid is the wealthy areas of the city being able to spend money on their very local areas, and the not so wealthy areas of the city not having that opportunity. I think that would be quite dangerous and divisive. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, got Hal next.
Yes, I obviously agree with the idea that everything should be open to everybody and organisations. I would like to present the alternative case to the one that Alistair put forward. And I do think that having an independent charity is a good way to go. And I wouldn't want it to be funding, as other people have said, council expenditure. And I very much agreed with Mark. So if you look at the projects that they have put out in Westminster, they're quite generic. They're not ward-based. They're sort of targets. And then to answer Alistair's point about other charities, I mean, companies or charities within Bath and North East Somerset make applications for that, for those funds. So I don't really see the problem that Alistair was talking about. And I think that if we were to keep the applications generic, and remember that you set the targets out and other people apply, I would go for from what I've heard of it, the Chelsea one of having 4 outsiders and 4 insiders, as it were.
Okay, thank you, Sean.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, this idea, assuming that it is voluntary, so why would you restrict it to Band H? Why would you say if you're in a smaller house you're not allowed to contribute? So I don't understand why you put that barrier in the first place. But more importantly, my concern is with this: how are we going to protect our existing charities? I mean, if presuming, as we've seen with other things like the National Lottery, we see donations to charities dip as a result of this. How are we going to protect our sort of homeless and cancer charities and animal charities from seeing a dip in their income?
Okay. Does anyone else want to speak?
If I may just sort of come back, I take the point that Mark raised about making sure it's distributed, but the wealthier areas might be more willing. The point I was trying to make, more willing to contribute to parks or youth services, let's say within Bath or within, let's say, Royal Victoria Park, which is used by all, including the children's play area. So it's not about fixing my street or something like that, where people who only use that street will be able to see the benefit of it. It should be money that's contributed to the wider public access things, such as youth service or parks generally. Yeah.
Okay, I've got Lucy on the list to speak next, but before that I wanted to speak myself, if that's okay. I feel that just having a large property is an indication that there are people who may have downsized and be much more income rich than property rich. And so whilst we could target it or suggest it for people with high value properties, I'd like to see that it in the publicity, it could refer to everybody being able, or anyone being able to contribute. I'd also like to make sure about very clear safeguards, because I know from my own mother, who's elderly and vulnerable, even if it made it quite clear, there's a chance she would misunderstand it. And I think we need to be very clear that, you know, if Sean wasn't clear and other people aren't clear, that it is voluntary, really, really clear. On the charity side, my concern with the general scheme is it takes a while to set up a charity, and there are very, very strict rules that would then be hard to determine, because we wouldn't have any experience of the scheme in Bath and North East Somerset, because there's been a lot of reference, you know, not unnaturally, to Royal Victoria Park and the city, but we are Bath and North East Somerset, as Hal mentioned. And so I think we need to consider, for my mind, I'd like to see a 1-year trial, which could be opening up the possibility without having to set it in stone when we have no experience. And as such, people, all residents, and then those who contribute would see that it was a 1-year scheme that could then be consulted on the results with residents and participants. And that would then give us time, if we did continue, to shape and formulate ready for a charity. So, Lucy.
I'm sorry, I'm just adding to what, and just saying that the type of things that Andy suggested seem to me overcome that issue of competing with charities and having a kind of mishmash of small projects that might not galvanize people as a whole, and things like, I mean, it's not nice to have services that have been cut, because they're actually more, the non-statutory services go beyond nice to have ones, but youth services, music services, cuts to park areas. Again, I don't know how you would present those to people as the things to choose from, but I think if it could be that type of service that everybody could contribute to, then it might solve some of those other problems that have been highlighted about just affluent people improving something in their area or competing with other charities. But actually getting to that point in terms of how you agree that the areas that would be funded is quite difficult. I couldn't suggest any ways of how you would achieve that, but yeah, I agree with Andy's suggestions there about how it could work.
Okay. Was there anybody else? Just looked at the chat. Was there anybody else waiting to speak? Because if that's the general comment section, can we then address each slide? Because it seems in principle that nobody on the panel is absolutely against the idea. It's how it's done and how it's achieved and some of the detail, yes, at this stage. If we went through those detailed points and then come back, then we could see what we could look at resolving. And if, Michaela, you can make quite some detailed notes for us, if we come up with a fairly broad resolution to put forward based on the points we've made, maybe that would get us forward. I'm very conscious of time. I feel that this is a key point we need to tackle today. So I propose we carry on with this subject. And it might be that we have to push over either one or more other agenda items to the next meeting. So if we carry on through this, because it is going to take us time to do what council's asked us to do. So the first scope question is, should the council adopt an inclusive approach, inviting all council taxpayers to contribute, or should it be limited to those in Band H? Do you think that, if you look at the considerations in the presentation there, could we tackle that one? Does anybody want to speak on that? Cara?
Chair, sorry.
Sorry. It seems that most of the panel have already said that they agree with the community fund in principle, but we're looking at a mixture of 0.2 and 0.3, that it should be open to everybody, not just Band H.
Andy, you were coming in there. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, exactly the same. I think listening to the debate, Chair, the general thrust was, yes, it's something to do, and also I think most people said that it should be wider than just Band H. I suppose the question is whether we ask businesses and others to contribute, but I think every resident should have the opportunity to contribute.
Okay, it strikes me that Karen's almost proposed that, and maybe if I could take it that you're willing to second it, is that
Agreed.
something we could put to the vote to get under our belt, yeah? So we've got a proposer and we've got a seconder that basically it's open to all residents and possibly businesses and people who don't even live in the area, yeah?
I can't see any reason why not, Chair, unless someone's got a good reason why we should restrict it.
Okay, I'll put that to the vote now. Winston, are you in favour, against, abstain?
In favour.
Next is Sean.
Yeah, in favour.
Mark.
Yeah, in favour.
Lucy.
Yes, yep.
Andy.
Yeah.
Karen.
4.
Hal.
4.
And myself 4. So hurrah, our first vote, and we're unanimous on that. And thank you to Karen and Andy for rapidly getting us through that one. So if we go
I'm also in favour.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Alistair. It is quite something trying to see you all and the slides and watch the chat in my defence. But please chime up, because I'm in no way stifling your democratic right, I promise you. So thank you. So on the second point then, what should be the vehicle for managing any new community contribution fund? Okay, so would anybody like to comment on this? I'll look at the chat quickly if I can clear this bit off the screen. I've got Karen coming up, but I'll just check that you're first. Yes, you are. So, Karen, do you want to speak?
Yes, I have a couple of issues, I guess, to raise. I'm not sure I know the answers to them. I think that what I'm concerned about is the conflict with officers' time. You know, if it's £1 million in Westminster, and they've got, I think Lucy might have mentioned 50% more houses, even if it's not as much as 50%, that's not a great deal of money. If we leave it inside the council, there are two issues. We would have to include the individual's salary, the officer's salaries in that, and which to my mind is a conflict. And we would also lose out on the gift aid, and we would also, I wouldn't imagine that we would have the expertise in-house, and that would look at, then we'd have to actually employ somebody, which doesn't really make sense to me at this moment in time. However, I am really concerned. It is really complex to set up a charity. You need lots of checks and balances. And I think that that could take a lot of time. And also it will take money from other charities. People who might have given to some of the other charities will potentially, you know, give to this because they think they're getting potentially value for money for their own services, not the statutory services. So I find I've got a bit of a conflict there, and I can't resolve it at the moment. But for me, having it internally in Baines doesn't sit right either.
So Hal?
Yes, sorry, am I on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Hal. Oh, you're back. There we go.
Yes, well, I've already made my position clear that I believe it should be a charity. I don't think it's absolutely horrendous to set up a charity. I've been involved in setting up two. You're right that it's more difficult than it was since the problems we had with some pretty big charities. But I do think that's the best way to go. As I said in the email I sent out earlier, selecting the trustees is really the key. And I take the point that we don't want to take too much time from council staff. And I think we should run it more like the way that the others have done, of setting up some targets and involving local people in getting funds to do those things. I certainly wouldn't want it to be seen to be providing services that the council has cut. I just think that is going to be one of those problems where people are going to say, okay, we're just being used to do those. I think we should identify research targets or things that are worth doing and that will make people feel good if we do them, and make them specific and, as I said before, generic rather than ward-based, and proceed with that.
Okay, I've got Sean, Lucy, and then myself so far. So Sean.
Yeah, I just think you've got a difficult job selling this to the public if you're putting this out here as Bath and North East Somerset Council charity. I think people will be a bit sceptical about that aspect, about the money being ring fenced for specific causes, and you know the skill set required to run this type of organisation for fundraising, etc., is not a skill set that you see typically within a council. So I think you're going to have a different level of staffing to be able to do this.
And Lucy?
Sorry, I think the differences we're having here are going to be, you know, expanded on a greater level, aren't they? But I see it as whether it would work as a tick box approach. You know, you tick a box at the end of your council tax and it's collected within the same process, and that it is about people that have extra money funding the nice to have services that are going to be cut, which seems to be what was said in the Labour motion, the principles behind it. So core services that the local authority can't deliver anymore. I know that is fraught with problems as well, that Mark has alluded to, but that is the situation that we find ourselves in. And there's a mechanism for connecting funds. I don't know whether I'm misunderstanding this, but there is a mechanism of collecting funds already, and maybe we should use that. And you have you tick the box to make your contribution to one of 3 or 4 areas, such as parks, music, libraries, something like that, rather than going to a lot more smaller projects that are more niche actually, and difficult to articulate and choose. Sorry, I mean the questions, it's difficult, isn't it? It's a lot of questions here to answer. Anyway, I don't support a charity, and I prefer the existing ways of collecting the finances, I suppose is what I'm saying.
In my experience, there are charitable organisations who, rather than supporting necessarily one objective, actually enable corporations, businesses, individuals to donate money, say how they'd like it spent, and all right, that organisation takes a cut, but they're independent, and then allocate the money out to projects like a Quartet. I'm not trying to advertise them, and I have no tie with them, but I know for groups I've been on, we've applied, I'm sure, to Quartet, to pots of money given under their control by beneficiaries, whether they be corporations or whatever. Now, on the one hand, the percentage that can be taken can seem quite high, but having been on a charity, you'd either have to have volunteers, or council officer time wouldn't, we wouldn't want to spend more time and money administering it than we collected, say. But I do think that there would be a lot of work to get this ready under a charity. I don't think it's possible, basically, by the next financial year. Council isn't likely to consider it, I don't think, until November at the earliest, and then that's not long until March. So whether, to go back to, I'd like to see a 1-year trial where we try to get a charity that administers money generally, not a specific cause one, to manage the money if necessary, albeit a percentage of it, but then it would be fair and separate and not require an unspecified amount of money going on solicitors and everybody to just get it all ready too quickly. So that would be my comment. And Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think my initial reaction on to this point is that I would favour not going down the charity route, that for the reasons that have been articulated by other people, the complexity in setting it up, and the potential issues with then administering a charity as it proceeds. I think we've got mechanisms for collecting council tax, and I agree with Lucy that actually the simplest way of approaching this, as I said in my previous comments, I think that keeping this simple is going to be important, and that the simplest way of approaching it is actually just to collect it through the normal council tax mechanism. I say I'm open to being convinced otherwise, but that's my initial reaction to it.
Okay, I'll just check the chat whether we've got any. Oh, I missed you further up. Oh, that was Mark, yeah? So
that was me.
Yeah, have I got everybody? It looks like it. So it seems to me, Chair, in this, there's concerns for good reasons about having a charity, whether people are saying long-term or short-term due to timescale, yeah? And so is there anybody feels like putting up a proposal at all to test it on a vote, to put it to the test? I mean, I don't mind having a go, that basically for the first year, as a minimum, like a trial, the money stays within the council, ring fenced, and it's clearly shown that groups can apply, and that a panel is put together to actually, we could discuss that later. Let's just talk about in the council or a charity first. So keep it in the council, at least for a 1-year trial. Yeah.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Okay, so can I put that to the vote? Winston?
In favour.
Sean?
Sorry, are we voting to say we're in favour of it being a charity or in favour of it being?
Well, I've just, one way or another, we have to vote. So I've just said we keep it in the council, i.e. not a charity for the first year.
Yeah. Trial it for the first year as a ring fence within the council, administered via council tax. That's what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just to get the feelers out, really, to find out whether this is a goer at all.
If we then move to some of the other points after this most fundamental, internal or a charity, if we could test that, because that certainly seems to be a sticking point that's quite varied amongst us. So are you happy to vote either way on that? Do you feel clear you can at this stage, Sean?
No, I think both have got serious issues, and I find it difficult to choose either of those options.
Would you like to abstain at this point then?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to.
Mark?
In favour of a year trial.
Yeah, in favour of within existing council mechanisms.
Andy?
Yeah, exactly the same within existing mechanisms. Yeah.
Karen? If we could just
do we know that we can actually collect it through our council tax?
No,
because I have no.
That wasn't the proposal. The proposal was: do we set up a separate charity, or do we?
Yeah. Okay. I'll go in favour to move it on. Yeah.
How?
I will vote for, but on the understanding that we're not closing the door to it being a charity after the year.
Yeah, well, I think that was why I worded it as a 1 year, so we could look at it in the light. So if that then settled as the panel's position that it's in-house, not a charity.
What about Alistair? You've forgotten Alistair again.
Alistair, I'm sorry, you're one off the bottom of my screen. So Alistair.
I'm very discreet. No, I'm in favour of that as well. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know, Mike, there's no way of moving up hours that are higher in the screen, not at the end of everybody. So on that basis, we have a broad decision that it's in-house. Okay. So on the consideration, should this be run through a council or an independent body, we've tackled that. Complexity and cost of the scheme and income generated would, I assume, be recorded in the first year on that basis, yeah?
Yep. Yeah.
And the timescale we've set implicitly is a year. And what would the council's governance arrangements, and who will decide on the use of funds? So these, if it's in the council, we've got to settle these last two elements. So does anybody have any light to throw or proposals on that? But let's have a debate first, shall we? So who should decide? Councillor Sean.
Oh, sorry, my question was on what you previously said, not on this.
Oh, go on, go ahead then.
Well, I'm just unsure if you're saying you want to collect it through a council mechanism rather than a charity mechanism, in the same way as council tax is collected. So are we asking people to donate on an annual basis? Because if they're not donating on an annual basis and it's a monthly basis, or it's whenever you feel like donating basis, the council mechanism won't work, will it?
It will, because you will be able to just tick a box to say, I'm happy to contribute an extra whatever, whether it's monthly, weekly, annually, whatever, because, you know, unless you're paying by cash, and then people might want to do it by cash. But most people, I suppose, do it through some banking arrangement, don't they?
Yeah.
That's how I see it working, Sean.
I mean, that's just generally not necessarily how people donate to charities. I think it's asking people to work out what they're going to do over the next year financially. But okay, I mean, I'll be guided by you lot. That's fine.
But the thing, if I may, Chair, sorry, but the thing is, it's discretionary. So if somebody didn't want to, you know, contribute or stop their contributions or start their contributions, there needs to be a mechanism for that. It's not, you're not locked in. It's not. There's no legal requirement for it, as we were saying at the beginning. So therefore, it needs to be purely voluntary and flexible in a way that people are allowed to contribute in whatever way they want, whether it's a lump sum or monthly or weekly or whatever, by cash or credit.
That's fine, but you've now moved into a totally different mechanism to the one I've understood we were going to be using, which was the council tax mechanism, where you just
it is.
On your return.
The council tax mechanism allows you to do that. You can pay by cash. You can go into Keynsham and pay by cash if you want.
So as I understand it, the broad proposal is that people would pay money into the council because we've decided it's not a charity. It would be held in the council and logged. When the money was there, then it would be available for distribution. You could plan on what was going to come in, but you can't distribute what hasn't arrived, because it might not arrive. But in principle, there's a lot of charities where people pay so much a month, and you know, they have to plan accordingly their work, whether it comes or it doesn't. So on that basis, I think for me, the question, I've got how, but just to focus on the question of is who's actually going to decide what it's sort of spent on, literally. If broad things are set up, somebody's got to say, well, that money spent there as opposed to there. But Hal, over to you. You were next.
Well, bearing in mind that this is an interim arrangement, I don't think we should go with anything too complex or too formal, because it's only for this year. It seems to me it will probably come to the council or some panel elected by the council.
Yes. Okay. So what do we think might be the options there? That I don't know. A scrutiny and policy panel can't do it. Whether a committee could be set up to administer it, a bit like I presume the SIL money for Bath is been decided how it's spent. So in essence, maybe, you know, either councillors, so many people across the council in a fair and equitable way could then sit and look at the greater good as to how it's spent with the criteria and fairly and squarely on different things and geographically. I've got Karen with her hand up.
Chair, there may be two separate steps on this. One, you mentioned the criteria. Maybe that needs to be set at the beginning of the year as to what the money will be spent on. And then I think that the panel is a good idea, because then you would get councillors you need from Bath and from North East Somerset, because obviously this money needs to be spent across the board. And then you can ask residents as well. Then if you did go to a charitable status, you would have your committee already set up potentially, with your potentially could be morphed into your trustees, which would be easier.
Yeah.
Okay. And now when panels are set up, there are two ways it's done. That it could be just done and drawn, or there's always the question of proportionality based on, you know, ideological party things. So that's something that needs to be considered, because there are two ways we set up things, but it's mainly on a proportional basis, isn't it, Andy, in your experience in the council?
Yeah, and I think in this case, Chair, we need to make sure that it's got sort of regional, you know, cross Baines representation as well. So, for example, the Chew Valley doesn't miss out, or the Thrubwell or wherever it might be, you know. So, yeah, but I think in I think you mentioned it earlier, a geographical and politically proportionate, fair mechanism, fair attendance or fair So I think we just keep the door open, but we make sure those principles are there, that we get cross Bath and North East Somerset, rural and urban, and cross party. Now, you know, you'd never end up with a perfect solution. And I wouldn't want now to start saying proportional, yeah, because you would want representation in, as I say, in parts of North East Somerset, regardless of proportionality. You'd want people represented from Radstock, regardless of proportionality, that sort of thing, you know. So
could it be that actually a group of people who we have in the council are already meeting each week, are the group leaders? Could we put to them that they could discuss the best way to put to council to select who went on the deciding panel? And
yeah,
that way, that covers every political persuasion here, but we don't have to settle it tonight.
no, that's right.
So
Yeah.
group leaders could look at the question of what's the best way to put the right people, because on that panel, in my view, it shouldn't be about politics. It should be like we try to be on this panel to do a best and fair job, you know, and
Yeah.
I'd like to say the planning committee, it's there to judge each application on its merits, not to be political, is it? And it's meant to be equitable and fair. So that's what we want to achieve, yeah?
I personally, I think so. I think as soon as you write in something like political proportionality, you know, you might turn some people off from contributing, whereas across the region, you know, regional representation, or, you know, the sub-regional representation is more important in my view, but that's just my view.
I think also we need to have skills on there to understand the applications. So if there is social well-being is a priority, councillors at least who are maybe to do with the health and young people panel or experience of it are quite key to achieve that objective, as opposed to somebody who knows a lot about planning applications, you know. So could I propose that we put to group leaders in our conclusion that they look at the best way to create a panel to set the criteria to put to council and each year, or for the first year, and also the best way to select the people to be on the panel, which ideally should be politically independent. Yeah. Is there anybody willing to second that? Karen, yeah. So can I put that to the vote? So Winston.
In favour.
Sean.
Yeah, in favour. Well, I do have some concern that you're creating a mini Wecker here.
I know.
Oh, I don't. That's a bit strong, but I was only trying to put something across to a group of people who do actually already exist, our group leaders. So, Mark.
Yeah, in favour.
Lucy.
Yes, in favour.
Andy.
Yes, happy with that, Chair.
Karen.
Yes.
Hal.
Yes.
Alistair.
Yes, happy, thank you.
And I think what I ought to do is, come to think of it, is declare an interest as a group leader and abstain. Because otherwise I could be argued as having a vested interest, but I don't think it's a pecuniary one. So, but in all seriousness, I will abstain, and maybe I should have left the room and not proposed it, but never mind. So, Lucy.
Can I just say something, just clarify on process, because with this question, as it affects the answering of the questions, who will decide on use of funds, grants given from the fund? I see, I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I see it a bit like the Waitrose green bot token things. You have a choice of 3 things. I think in terms of people actually wanting to tick the box on the end of their council tax form, they will want to know what they're ticking the box for. I think they won't want to think, I'm just putting it into some slush fund and it might end up in something obscure that I don't really agree with. So I don't know, in terms of forming the panel, would the panel's remit be to come up with, say, 3 areas that we are going to put to residents, and maybe then that is given the okay by council, and then then those areas are agreed at some sort of level, and then they go out to residents to say, would you like to contribute to these areas? So it's a slight kind of turning round of the process. So the question is saying we're going to have a panel that decides to give grants or how to use the fund. I would see it as the other way round. The panel has a good discussion about, and this is on keeping everything simple, what is going to be funded out of this fund? Do you have a layer? I don't know whether you go out to residents or not, or you agree that at a council level, and then that is what is on offer to residents as part of their council tax. And I just think going forward, we almost ought to be clear about the process that we are thinking about when we put it forward as.
If I could clarify, if that helps, that I think that's exactly what I meant. That group leaders try and refine a process like that. That the three areas are put to council, so every councillor has a right to debate it.
Okay.
And then I think it's a good proposal that you've added to that, which is that when people are making the donation, they could tick, say, one of three boxes or one or more of the boxes in which they want their money spent on. So if they tick all three, it's 33 1/3 on each. If it's only one, then all of it goes on that one. I don't know if that's possible technically to do, but you know, maybe that's the way to do it. If that's as you.
I suppose I wasn't quite suggesting something so complex, but I was suggesting that people, when they say they're going to contribute, they know what they're contributing for. They're not just contributing to a general fund that then this panel will decide how to distribute. They will know that they're contributing to a fund that will fund certain things, and then they can make a decision. And then the next year they might think, oh, I'm not going to contribute this year, but they might fancy the things next year that come up or something like that.
And there were in the presentation, I forget which council it was, had three areas that it was going to cover. So yeah, if that's what you mean, not tick boxes, but being clear, that's exactly what I think I meant in proposing. The group leaders look at those three to put to council. Council can amend them, vote on them, and then there's clarity, and they will also put forward a mechanism on how people apply or whatever, in the panel, how we make it up.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember if are people happy we might have agreed that if that was a clarification, or do you want another vote? No. Can you shake your head if it's no? No, good. Right, Karen, you were coming in. Karen?
No, I think it was the third point.
Okay. Do you mean
So we're only on
the
still
third discussion point? Yeah, we are getting there, but our meeting is soaking it up, the time. So on that basis, can we move on? Have we covered the governance arrangements and all that? Now, utilisation. This, I think we've already begun to touch on, haven't we? Yeah. So is there anybody would like to make a proposal on this to debate?
I think we could we give the group leaders some guidance as to some of the things that we'd like considered, like the criteria, which will be like parks, as Andy said, libraries, can't remember what the third one was, but also well-being, health and well-being, and youth services, and the other ones that were in Westminster.
Well, Andy, if you remember very early on, if this is right, Andy, you suggested non-statutory services. Do you want to elaborate on that if I draw that in?
Well, things like, just like Karen said, so things, what came to mind was parks, libraries, youth service, or, sort of things around the youth service are three things that come to mind that as a council that we're cash strapped, will get cut and cut and cut, because those are our non-statutory responsibility. We have responsibilities, but they're non-statutory. So they will be forever on the low priority list. And to be honest, those three things, and there may be others as well, but those three things bring a lot of pleasure and joy to many residents across the whole district. So whether you enjoy your libraries or you enjoy your parks, or you believe that things like the youth service should be better funded in your area. So, you know, there may be a drive in Keynsham, for example, to improve the youth service, and that, you know, residents in Keynsham might be ticking that box merrily going, yes, I'm happy to contribute because we would like to do that. So that sort of now, whether you go beyond that and then go into areas like, as you say, health and well-being, that then, in my view, and I'm no expert in it, but then you start getting into this difficult area of huge service areas like adult social care or children's services that are hugely funded in as far as the sharing out the pie is concerned, yeah, who that money, small amount, could just get, you know, swallowed up and not seen as getting much benefit from it. So it needs to be, in my view, the non-statutory services, but those that you can target a certain service area and see benefit from it.
Okay, Karen's put her hand up. I've not got anybody else. So Karen, say if I've missed you.
Yeah, so I think that there were two others that weren't covered. Helping young people reach their potential is on the Westminster slide, and that could be covered by youth services. But they've also got rough sleeper assistance, which I think quite a lot of residents would like to see less of. And then I don't know about in Bath, but and I'm sure it will be more holistic than just in the rural areas, but assist lonely people, because it is a big concern, and especially with COVID. So may I propose that we send up to the group leaders 5 potential criteria of areas that we would consider relevant and appropriate, which are parks, libraries, youth services, homeless or rough sleepers, and assisting lonely people, for them to whittle down to, I don't know, maybe 3 as others have.
6, but if we propose 6 to go to 3, yeah. And do we also
Sorry,
touch
why is
in
it?
there
No, I said
parks,
the young,
libraries, youth? Oh, sorry, yeah,
homeless, rough sleepers,
yeah.
and assist lonely people.
5.
Yeah.
And do we also make a geographical thing that it's spread as far as possible?
Yes, and it is across the whole authority.
Yeah. So on that basis, there's a proposal that those are suggested to the group leaders if they take up this challenge to put to council, and all councillors then can comment on it and debate it, amend if they want, and then vote. Yeah. So is there a seconder to that? Andy, right. Winston, are you in?
Can you just read out the list of 6 again?
5. Parks, libraries, youth, lonely people, and the homeless.
May I speak against this motion?
Yeah, no, speak again, Hal. And I've got Sean waiting. So what we'll do is, if I take Hal and then Sean, I've got you on the list to speak, I've seen from the MIS. So before we go further, do you two want to go? So Hal?
So I still think Andy is sees this money as something that can be spent by council people to do services that were going to be cut. And that's not the way that it would work if you had a charity that was looking for target projects. And I think that's where we fundamentally differ. I'm quite happy with the things that Karen talked about that were raised at Westminster, but I'm unhappy with the idea that we are collecting this money to do things that have been cut by the council. So I will oppose that.
Okay. And would you add the word potentially cut, because it might not have been cut, maybe, might
well,
it?
yeah,
but
no.
That's quite clear what you mean. And Sean?
I'm pretty much on the same vein as Hal on this. I mean, I struggle between looking at what Westminster are using their money for, which is say, things like assisting lonely people, things that are outside the remit of the council. They're not using it to cover council cuts. And what we're proposing is we're gonna try and cover the cuts by the council on libraries and parks.
No.
I'm just not sure that's the way that this should be going.
No.
Okay, so remember, we got to this proposal with Andy proposing in a way non-statutory and Karen adding lonely people, I think, and homeless, yeah, and then now we've got another vein coming in. Shall we go ahead and put the 5 areas to the vote, and if that falls because it was in first, then look at what else we could do?
Chair.
Yeah. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say these wouldn't be areas that necessarily the council will cut. Youth services in rural areas are provided by parish council money. Libraries, it wouldn't be a cut to libraries. It would be increasing the number of community libraries, which have been very successful, and maybe giving them grants. And lonely people are not part of the services that the council have anything really to do with. The only one potentially might be parks, but that might be extra projects,
Well,
not cuts necessarily.
Could I just cut in and propose that we reverse backwards and tackle this issue head on? Should the money go for extra things over and above, in a sense, to tackle issues, or should it be allowed to go where there have been cuts or services reduced in that sense? Because there seems to be a dichotomy between like Hal and Sean, and if I'm not putting words in your mouth, Andy, whether you meant to be specific, that's the reaction we're getting the other way. So would it work if we actually tried to settle that? And Mark, do you want to come in on that? Yeah.
I mean, I agree with that in principle, and as I raised the issue to start with about the using this to replace things that should be done anyway. But I think the problem is going to be who decides, because if it's non-statutory, then it's non-statutory. So I don't see that there's an easy way of squaring that circle. I think that things that have been cut might be things that you want to fund from this money, and equally it would be good to fund things that were extras. So I mean, I don't see it's easy to write a rule for it.
Now, Sean, you're trying to come in here.
Sorry, yeah, I think just to go back a step further, I think first thing you need to agree is that this money must go outside of the council. It can't be retained within the council to pay for areas of cuts. The money must go to outside bodies, I think, in the first instance.
Absolutely.
So what I was going to clarify then are we as a meeting and as panel members talking about the group leaders deciding a panel and proposing it with a series of areas like we've discussed 5 that are spread geographically, and then charities or community bodies are invited to apply for those funds?
Correct.
The panel then decides whether and how to allocate them. Now,
Yeah.
I've got Mark with his hand up.
I'm just slightly concerned by that, because it implies that if it's a service provided by the council, like for example the music service, then it can't apply. And that seems to put some of the things that we might want to fund with this money, it puts them outside of the remit of the funding, and that I think is not what everybody intended.
Can I just qualify what I said, that it was a question, and I'm glad you've clarified, Mark. So I've got Alistair, I think, waved, and I've got Winston. So I'll just look at chat, but Alistair, do you want to go ahead then, Winston, and I'll check the chat?
No, I wasn't waving.
Oh, right, okay. Lucy, were you waving? You're not waiting, are you? No. No, we'll go ahead, Winston.
I'm just worried we're being too prescriptive to the group leaders. I think we're second guessing and we're getting into too much detail. I mean, the fact that we're going on for 15, 20 minutes and we can't quite decide whether it's 5 or, whether it's cuttable or non-cuttable. And I think the world is moving on so quickly that if we had this discussion in 6 months' time, we might come up with not all 5. We might come out with 3 of those 5 and maybe add 2 more. I just think we're trying to be too prescriptive on this. The brief to us was a mechanism for identifying local priorities for support. And I think the mechanism could well be the leaders get together. And at that stage, we put the onus on the leaders to come up with something rather than us coming up with something on September the 28th, 2020.
Well, could I just round that round by saying, could, as somebody suggested earlier, we say, we discussed this and we came up with 5 things and we came up with the geographical. There was an idea that people could apply for the funds and there were concerns both ways about money being used to replace cuts or not cuts, and put that to the leaders. Now that would then cover both sides of what we've done, or we could take a vote on this use of the money. But I think it's going to be quite hard to come to a conclusion. So how would it be if we sent some guidance and then asked them to put it to council? Yeah,
Happy with that.
Yeah, I'd be happy
I agree with that.
Mark,
Yeah, I mean, it
confirm
does
for
say,
you.
are there other specific areas projects?
Okay.
In
Mark,
point
how do you
2.
feel about
So,
that?
Sorry, was that addressed at me?
It was, because I was going to go to Sean and Hal, who you've had particular.
Yeah, no, that sounds perfectly reasonable.
And Hal, you've had strong views. Would that be fair?
Certainly. I mean, in the consideration there, I don't think it should necessarily be linked to agreed council priorities and the corporate strategy.
No.
But I'm perfectly happy with what you have proposed.
And you all will have a chance as councillors to scrutinise it. Now, Sean, I'm going round because you have that strong view. Are you happy we've covered it? It will come to council and it can be debated and amended, but the group leaders have a bit more time to come up with something.
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
All right, I'd like to propose that. So can somebody second? Right, Winston, are you in? What do you vote on this then?
Yes, I'm in favour of your suggestion, your motion.
Right, I'm in favour. Sean?
Yeah.
Mark?
In favour.
Lucy?
Yes, in favour.
Andy?
Yeah, I'm happy.
Karen?
yes, happy.
Hal?
In favour.
And Alistair?
In favour.
Right, so on that basis, we're on the home run. I dread to think what time it is, but there we go. So engagement, point 4. And what will be the means of consulting with residents on the introduction of any such fund? Any initial consultation to gauge support, consultation priorities, consultation approach. So could I open on this by saying that given we worked so hard on a consultation process, I do think we should consult on this. And then I've got so far to speak is Councillor Warrington. Are you going for it, Karen?
Yes, I am. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I think this is going to be about the presentation so that people understand. And I think it's going to have to be very carefully communicated. And if we consult, we've got to make sure that we cover all bases. So it's, maybe mail, maybe web-based, but maybe also look at using parish councils as well. And town councils. I know you don't have that in Bath, but you might be able to use the Bath forums because that's a way of really getting down to the nitty gritty and getting people engaged with it.
Okay. And any other comments? Mark?
Yeah, and just, are we talking here about consultation on the whole idea of introducing this at all?
I think I think my gut feel, unless one of the officers wants to comment, was that this was about, this is the scheme that, if it were possible, say, would go out in March. This is your chance to consult, you know, and take on board that comment.
Okay, so I guess my observation would be, I mean, I'm absolutely always in favour of engagement with the community and consultation on things. However, it's going to be difficult to run a consultation at that kind of speed that's actually worth doing. And we're not making, this isn't compulsory, nobody has to do it. So, I mean, you know, we're not enforcing anything on anyone. So, I'd question whether the consultation is worth it. If we're talking about a year's trial anyway, why don't we just trial it and see if anyone actually takes it on? I mean, I think consultation's a very good thing, but I don't see how it's going to happen meaningfully before March and the scheme get introduced.
Just Sean, before I bring you in, does Gary or Carl, if he's still here, do you have a clarification on what you meant by this, just to check we've got it right?
Yeah, I think it was an open-ended question based on your discussion. And you've obviously had a lot of discussion getting to this point where you're talking about a trial, which potentially you wouldn't, I think has been raised before, you wouldn't do that much consultation ahead of it. It would be more about how you engage with the community to let them know we're implementing a scheme on this trial basis, and promote the scheme probably more than a consultation ahead of launching the scheme about, are you in favour of the scheme? So I think the discussion's moved on probably past what the purpose of this slide was, in terms of, do you consult before you launch a scheme?
Okay, I got Sean to speak, then Lucy. I'll take the list, but Sean, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just quick. I think, I mean, first of all, I think you've got to be very careful with this consultation, whether you're going to the public about band H only, or whether you're going about a general voluntary contribution funds, because you'll get a totally different response to both. But secondly, I mean, this is not just for this one, but any consultation with the public, we should be specifying a minimum number of responses to make it valid. Because I've seen too many of these where you get 2 people respond, you say, we've got an overwhelming majority of 2 people say yes. So I think you need to set a minimum before it becomes valid.
All I would just clarify on a consultation, it's not a vote, although it's valid that only 2 people responded, so it's not a valid consultation because not enough people did. But I go along with what, personally, because I raised this, Gary said, and you. So Lucy.
Just
Lucy, you've switched off your microphone.
sorry, I just agree with Mark's point.
That's all right, sorry.
A trial, and it needs really careful explaining, but I don't see a consultation would work well in this situation.
How?
Yes, I think Mark put it very well. We don't want to spend too much time on it. It is voluntary, and we will find out as part of this trial a lot of things, how much money is likely to come in, etc., etc. So the consultation after that will be much more informed.
Okay, and that was Alistair.
Yes, repeating earlier points, that the exercise would in itself be a consultation. People will vote with their checkbooks or their bank balances. And I think that as long as the comms around it is well developed and reaches people, then there's no need for a formal consultation in advance.
I don't think anybody else is waiting to speak. Could I make a new, oh, Andy, go on.
Sorry, yeah. Just to add to that, I do think though that parish and town councils and the Bath Forum should be informed, you know, that this sort of thing is going to happen, and ask them for their feedback and thoughts, because they might come up with a different community list than we have. All right, they might come up with different ways and mechanisms. They might have some great ideas of how you're going to administer this, which we haven't thought of. So but using the parish and town councils as the conduit, not going out to the wider population because of the cost of it and like Sean says, you know, the validity of whatever feedback you get. But I think we might get some good feedback from parishes and town councils, although it's we're informing them that's going to happen, and any feedback would be useful from them.
Could I just point out that given they often only meet monthly or not as often, and given the forums to get it on the agenda, could we put that if it's possible, because if it's not going to council till November and you want to come up with a scheme to implement that you're talking about taking comment on and maybe having to incorporate, we'd never make March. And so if we emphasize, as I think I'd like to propose, that we emphasize that it's a trial and that we would do the consultation at the end of the period, and take on board that first year's results when it's actually there, and do our best endeavours to do a consultation with the councils and the forums, subject to timescale. Karen, you're waiting.
When I was talking, I wasn't actually talking about consultation. I was actually talking about the engagement of the trial and the comms around it.
Right, what you mean is communicating as a presentation what it's about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's even better then, isn't it? So we could put that it's a trial. The proposal is it's a trial. We consult at the end of the first period, and we work with parish and forums to communicate what it's about.
Yes.
For engagement.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you've got that, Michaela. So can I put that to the vote, if that's right? So Winston.
And a seconder.
Oh, seconder, sorry, caller.
I'll second.
Okay.
Right, who was that? Sorry, was that Mark? Who
Winston. It was Winston.
Oh, that was Winston. Sorry, right, Winston, vote.
I'll vote in favour.
I'm in favour. Sean?
Yeah, I'm in favour.
Mark?
In favour.
Lucy?
In favour.
Andy?
In favour.
Karen?
In favour.
Alistair?
In favour.
Hal?
In favour.
So we've now covered the 4 areas, I believe. Gary, can you confirm that you think we've covered the 4 areas enough to put something to council? Because you're going to be our officer, hopefully supporting us.
Yeah, I think you've covered all the points and you've got some feedback for council on all of those points sufficiently.
And could I at this point celebrate your work with your colleague Carl, and particularly celebrate every member of the panel's involvement. And although it's taken virtually the entire meeting, I hope we all feel we've made the world potentially move forward on this, do we? Yeah? And lots of nodding, hopefully. So on that basis, we're now going to rapidly reappraise the agenda as we're 15 minutes over. So could you take down the presentation, Gary, please?
Yeah.
And are people happy we move on? What we'll do is Winston and I will take the notes with Michaela and Gary to refine those up to what we put to council. But we can we not, Michaela, circulate that to members of the panel?
Yeah, I can do that.
I'd hopefully like to put to council what we believe, but do recognise that there's been a huge debate here. We've got specific resolutions, and we'll do our best to really represent that fair and square. So going back to our agenda, I think sadly we haven't got time for procurement, and I would question whether we've actually got time to do the task and finish group, in all honesty, because unless you feel like going, until 7 o'clock, which I don't think we do, can we postpone those 2 items to the next meeting? Lucy?
I just wondered if the task and finish group, if we're only supposed to be a few minutes each, then we could tick that off, not extend it to another week.
Okay. How do people feel about, how do you feel about another 10, 15 minutes if we take 3 or 4 minutes? What we could do is a slight compromise. If we took your suggestion, Lucy, and say we do a quick update on the work we did from the 3 groups, and then cover it in more detail if we wish next time, yeah? How about that? So we could compromise, but make sure we could get that through to Cabinet and whoever, yeah? So, Karen and I, would we like to go first, because that was the first topic? Over to you, Karen. Yeah.
Crumbs. Right, sorry, I've lost my
Do you want a moment? Shall we change the order? I will be joining.
No, that's I just wanted to get my the report up. That's all.
Okay.
So I'm kind of guessing that most people have read the report and they're relatively comfortable with it, but clearly I think we've got quite a lot of work to do with heritage and tourism, because we need to understand what that will look like in 5 and 10 years and what our strategy needs to be. And it looks like that COVID may accelerate some of the issues that we felt might come up in the near future. So we thought they were going to be sort of medium term, and now obviously with COVID they're coming in. We do have quite a lot of attractions outside, so outside Bath, so it'd be nice to try and combine some of those. And we discussed last time as well, looking at trying to get more people to actually stay and spend more money in Bath and North East Somerset. And we discussed the millennials, as they say in Dinner Ladies, about whether that younger people really wanted that sort of experience rather than just wandering around and history and heritage. And we also discussed the nightlife, which is quite key. It's very vibrant in Bristol, and it's the demographic is quite different in Bath. So we suggested that it would be a good idea to look at some data and try and get some evidence base in this, and look at maybe getting some of that information from business improvements, so BID, and destination management organisation as well. So we had some bullet points under 4.7 with what we could look at, the number of people coming during the day and overnight stays, why people don't come. And we needed some key information, and we also need to understand any future trends in heritage and tourism so that we can look at it more as a business and explore and actually develop other types of products. We also might like to try and see what other cities are doing with rural communities around them. The one that always comes to mind with me is York, because they've got quite a bit of heritage, and there may be things that they're doing that we might like to consider over here as well. Does that sum it up?
Yeah, and I think just the key message with this is that whatever the budget and then the medium-term financial plan do in terms of real specifics, that this is looking way out ahead at the trends and changes in the customer behaviour, because it's a business, not just a budget. And to really make the success of it and keep it on track, delivering for the council's finances, we need to have our finger on the pulse of the market, not just the costs and the budget and how much money it will make. There's no criticism, it's just that we've had that ability in the past, and we need to make sure as these big changes come in that we do look way ahead. So the next one, I believe, was parking. Winston and...
That was me.
Mark will lead, and I'll try and make intelligent additions if needed.
That was no reflection on your role, Mark. It was just that your name went over the page. So
That's all right. Don't worry. Yeah, so there's a good presentation from the officer around the current parking situation. Obviously, I think we all recognise that the parking in the city will change a lot over the next 5 to 10 years. That the strategy of the council is to move towards a reduction in traffic in the city centre, and that has an impact on parking, and that development of car parks has been is on the agenda. So that's going to put pressure on car parking spaces, and that there's pressure for curb space in the town, and for pressure on residents parking. So I think we all recognise that relying on car parking for business income is probably not going to be a long-term strategic aim of the council, or shouldn't be, and that as changes in transport occur, the thing that came out of the debate most, I think, was about focusing much more on the park and ride offer and expanding that, and looking at further uses of the park and ride, and looking at the joined up travel policy through WECA through the local transport plan, to make sure that journeys are being made in the most sensible way, and that the parking occurs at the park and ride sites out of town mostly, and that the parking in town is more of a service to residents than an income generator based on tourist parking. Seemed to be the main focus of the things that came out of it.
Okay, and does that cover you both? Yes.
I'd just say I think this doesn't need a lot more research. It's frustrating that we're not making more gains. I think we should get on with the park and rides. We should get on with the RPZs, starting preferably with Lincolnville, Greenway Lane and Perrymead. And it's a win-win. It's a win-win. Let's get on with it.
Okay, and then Sean and Lucy now finally. Lucy, I think you're on silent.
Find this.
I'll take. Oh.
Yes, I think you put me on, sorry. So we were going to focus on the commercial estate, and thank you to Richard, the officer, who gave us all the background detail. But in terms of the investment estate, our discussion focused on the retail assets in the city centre. We noted that the footfall was already falling before COVID, and due to increasing challenge from online shopping, the period of change for retail has been accelerated by COVID. We reflected that the retail experience is still important to both residents and visitors. It's not just about acquiring goods. We need more data to understand and be actually clear about this shift in behaviour, with the aim to meet this target of enhancing the retail experience. That's what we've got to work with. So moving forward, real estate must be built around delivering, retail estate must be built around delivering that experience. Various initiatives are already underway and they were recognised, such as pedestrianisation of Milson Street, the Love Our High Street funding and how that's being used to make the High Street more attractive and animate the vacant units. One approach was thinking about Instagrammable windows, giving people a purpose to go to a destination, and independents are recognised as still having a very important role to play. It was also noted that although generally there's been an increase in tenants struggling to pay rents, independents are coping particularly well, and they're not overrepresented in that group. So we particularly noted the potential to improve the nighttime economy. We need to make the city centre an attractive place to go for a wider range of residents and visitors in the evening. We are missing out on income here. Many residents have moved to Bath from cities with a vibrant nightlife, and overnight visitors will want an evening experience in an attractive, buzzing city centre. There's definitely room for economic gains here. There is also a significant demand for park and ride services which extend later into the evening, so residents can return from the cinema, theatre, restaurants by bus and do not need to bring a car into town. Again, this will help the nighttime economy. So summing up from my half, what does this lead us to investing in? The retail experience is what we need to focus on now, but we will have to be mindful of the impact of reducing vehicular access to the centre and improving the nighttime city centre experience, a source of income that is far from fully realised. And this should go hand in hand with improving public transport to and from the city centre in the evening. So Sean is going to carry on from me.
Go on, Sean.
I'll try not to be too repetitive. Okay, so our current property portfolio has around 1,200 properties, of which 250 are considered to be prime assets. We noted that it would be useful if the officers could provide more detailed information, perhaps showing the history and direction of travel, so that we can understand how the estate has evolved to its present form, and a continuation to indicate how they intend to evolve it in the future to adapt to the changing markets, particularly shopping, retail, entertainment, food, and also our commercial and industry within Baines. We shared the following concerns, ideas and thoughts with officers. How do we intend to work in the short term with our current stock to maximise our revenue? And what changes in direction will we be making to our portfolio for further increase to benefits, both to our income and also to our resident and visitor experience? We sought feedback on the impact of the demographics and flow of people to the council-owned retail outlets as a result of changes in our infrastructure. In particular, the pedestrianisation of Milson Street and the reduction of vehicle accessibility to the city. Also some clarification on any incentives being considered to bring commercial tenants into our key areas of growth. Bath is an attractive city to visit, and some of our sectors offer a wide and varied selection of options, such as restaurants. However, there appear to be weaker sectors that require enhancement if we're going to attract more overnight and longer term visitors. For example, as said earlier, our nighttime economy seems to be very orientated towards our student populations. We need also to look at, with climate emergency at the core of our policies, considerable thought needs to be given to how we're going to protect the income stream generated by our property while reducing vehicle access. Just one final point, of course, it's important to take into account the current COVID-19 pandemic and to emphasise that support of our tenants should be our primary objective for the duration of the crisis.
Okay, so as time has gone on, I think as chair, I'd like to celebrate all those contributions and the work of the workshop. People who weren't there, I think hopefully you can see that there was a really interesting debate. I think if I could propose that we put on our next agenda where we go from here, rather than go into a big and further debate now, so we can draw in all members of the panel. Is that fair to the members who were there at the workshop and the members who weren't? That we next time come, and you can see this today in the minutes, and we'll pop it on the agenda to do the next stage, yeah? So do I need a vote on that, Michaela?
No, you can ask if anyone disagrees and then just assume
All
that.
right. Right, does anybody disagree with that? No, okay. Just in case we're quizzed, I can therefore, or did anybody abstain? if on that basis, if I'm asked as your chair, what came of it all? We ran out of time, but we're going to do some more work next time, okay? So I'd also like you to propose, unless Michaela's desperate, that we also postpone the work plan discussion. We've had quite long discussions of late on the work plan, and Michaela and I will work on some future dates. Is that okay, Michaela?
Yeah, yeah.
So on that happy basis, after a very full and involved meeting, we're only 35 minutes over over target, and I do apologise, but I hope you agree. I think it would have been a missed opportunity not to get that good information and debate over to council. So do I have to make a statement at the end of my note?
You just have to close the meeting.
I thanked everybody for attending. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined us online today, and I'd like now to formally close the meeting, and thank you to everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Chair.